Hello, and welcome to the Hey Boomer Show. Our show is live every Monday on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and then available by podcast by the very next day. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And I'm on a mission to support and inspire people in the next act of their lives. I do this through the inspiring guests that we have on the show and through the What's Next group coaching program that I offer. We are evolving, not retiring. We are defining what this next stage of our lives will look like. So join us on this journey. I wanted to take a moment to thank Rhodes Scholar for their support of Hey Boomer. Rhodes Scholar is the not-for-profit leader in adventure travel and educational travel for boomers and beyond. They offer expert-led adventures in all 50 states and over 100 countries. Learning and traveling with Rhodes Scholars is probably my most favorite way to go. I have 2 trips planned for this summer, and this past summer I went to Glacier National Park. It was amazing. So check out some of their amazing educational adventures on their website at roadscholar.org/heyboomer. I suspect that most of you know someone who has tried or succeeded at committing suicide. It's painful to think about how difficult life must have been for someone to reach this point. Sometimes it is chronic pain or illness that leads someone to make that decision. And in teens and older adults, it seems that loneliness is also a contributing factor. The feeling that no one cares, feeling like you no longer have a place. In our conversation today with Dennis Gillan, we're going to talk about mental health and some of the stigma that is still associated with talking about your own mental health. We're going to talk about the warning signs that might indicate that someone is thinking about harming themselves. We may discuss how men and women face loneliness and depression in different ways. And we'll talk about how you could get involved in the suicide prevention work if you feel like that is an area where you want to put some of your energy. So let me bring Dennis on and do a brief introduction so that you can all meet him. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, Wendy. How are you?
I am well. I'm glad you were able to join us today.
Well, I'm growing a gray beard for my fellow boomers during No Shave November for mental health. So there you go.
There you go. Thank you for supporting that. So Dennis Gillan is a national thought leader on the topic of suicide prevention and mental health advocacy. He travels internationally, speaking, raising awareness, and reducing the stigma surrounding mental health. Dennis has been deeply touched by suicide after the loss of both his brothers to suicide 11 years apart. After years of sitting on the sidelines, he jumped into helping those in need by working on the suicide prevention hotline when he lived in Chicago. And after moving to South Carolina, Dennis got involved with several nonprofits that take on mental health issues, and this allows him to lobby lawmakers and raise awareness by sharing his story. Dennis gave a TED Talk about loneliness that received over 25,000 views. He also co-wrote a children's book about dealing with sadness and showing children how kindness can save a life. He is now the executive director of a nonprofit called Half a Sorrow Foundation, and we're going to talk about where that name came from. But for now, Dennis, I wanted to start with you giving a brief story of your life and what brought you to the suicide prevention work that you're doing today.
Sure, Wendy, thank you for that intro. And like many folks, uh, my misery has become my mission. And you alluded to the misery. I'm one of five kids, and three boys, two girls, and two of the boys died by suicide, 11 years apart. Which I wouldn't wish one on the devil himself. And here, one family had to go through it twice. Um, and it was one, I was in college, so I was 20 years old, and then Matthew was my younger brother. It was 11 years later. I was like 31 and working. And for about 16, 17 years, I didn't talk about the boys at all. I did some covert help by working on the suicide prevention lifeline, but I could do that anonymously, and none of my neighbors knew it. I would just go at night. I'd go work the lines and I'd come home. I had one shift Thursday nights from 8 to 12, and I would just volunteer, do it, and come home. I didn't tell anybody about it, but it felt like it
Hmm.
was some of the most rewarding work I've ever done. But I could remain anonymous. No one had to know. Uh, and then finally, I spoke out about my brothers somewhere here in South Carolina where I live, probably about 2010, 2011. I think it was 2011 when we did a fundraiser for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and they asked me to say a few words about what what happened to me and what they were doing a walk out of the darkness walk and what the walk has meant to me. I said, all right, I can do 5 minutes. And I barely got through that talk. It was brutal. And I sat down and I remember this woman coming up to me. She said, "You need to tell that story more often." And I remember kind of laughing and going, I'm done. We're done. One and done. You heard it. It's over. And, we make plans and God laughs. And next thing you
Yeah.
know, I got a call from a school and they said, "Hey, we heard you at that walk. Can you come speak?" I'm like, all right, let's try this. I bombed horribly. I cried the whole time. And then I heard another school called up and said, "Hey, we heard you did a good job at that school." I'm like, I don't think I did a good job. And then I only cried half the time. And then it was here in down in Charleston, South Carolina, where the third time I spoke, I started to hit my stride, and it all came together. So there were some really bad presentations. There are some really good ones now, and it's become my calling of sorts.
Yeah, so maybe not bad, but you were uncomfortable sharing the emotion. I'm curious as to why the suicide prevention hotline, why that was so important to you to stay anonymous on that.
I don't think I was ready to share my story at the time. I had moved to Chicago, like you alluded to in the intro. And when I got there, I told everybody, people would ask, "Hey, Dennis, how many kids in your family?" I'd say, I had two sisters back in New York. I wasn't ready to share. I was in my proverbial man cave with my emotions, and it's a terrible place to be. I should have been sharing it. Uh, in fact, one time I was lamenting the fact that I waited so long with the local pastor. And he said, "Dennis, that was your time in the desert. You weren't ready." And he was right, because the first time I tried to speak about my brothers in a setting where, I was the highlight, I was a keynote speaker, I didn't do so good. And maybe I wasn't ready. And I was, life prepares you for this journey. And I'm always amazed when you see someone who's been afflicted with a tragedy and they get right out there and they start helping people. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow. And that's cool. That's how they heal, and, different strokes for different folks. I couldn't do that. I wasn't ready to help anybody because I was not in very good shape myself.
Yeah. Yeah, totally understandable. And like you said, as a man, hiding your emotions, that's kind of what y'all have been taught. But I did a show a couple of weeks ago about something that happened to me, and it was years ago, but it was hard to talk about. So, yeah, those things happen. So, let's talk about the stigma around mental health. I mean, it's hard to talk about to other people that we're having problems or that somebody in our family is having problems. Why? What can we do about that?
Well, if you look at the last couple of years during the pandemic, there's some positive. I always try to like silver lining kind of guy. The pandemic has helped us in the mental health field where it really bubbled up to the top and said, "Hey, we need to talk about this." For years, we remained silent talking about mental health, and there was a stigma. Like if I showed up on your show today, Wendy, and I had say an insulin pump that was visible, your audience would know right away, "Hey, Dennis, probably, diabetic." And everybody would, "Oh, that's fine. His pancreas isn't working." But with mental health, it's kind of like those invisible wounds. Yeah, I could show up and be fine, but I wasn't fine. And I
Mm.
did that for years after Matthew died. I showed up. I looked okay, but inside it was a disaster zone. Um, but we just need to get over that. I think the pandemic's helped that, and doing shows like this and podcasts. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, people wouldn't even book me to do something like this. Hey, we're going to talk about suicide prevention. Like, I'm not doing that. Now they're like, hey, what time can you get in here? It's a different era. And for the boomers, we're a proud generation. We tend to hold it close. My dad, who was above me, he couldn't even talk about my brothers. It was, we
Yeah, I
didn't
can't
talk at all
imagine.
about the boys. It was awful. So I have hope. I look back at, I look down at my sons now. I have two boys. They talk about mental health. That generation's pretty cool about it. And it's getting better, but the stigma still exists, to your point, and we all need, personally, we need to get over that.
Yeah, and David just shared with us as he's going into class a little while ago, one of his students was leaving in tears because she had just heard that one of her friends attempted suicide. So it covers
Mm.
all age range. Are you
It really does.
addressing different ages as you talk about this, or are you focusing on one area?
No, if you look at me, I'm a boomer. I'm right at the end there. I'm 1963, and it goes up to 64. For some reason, have hit a stride, uh, hit a sweet spot for the Half a Star Foundation's colleges. I don't know. I feel like Bernie Sanders. The college kids love me. They keep bringing me back, which is great because they have high suicide rates. In the pandemic, the new numbers came out, and those folks between 15 to 24 were impacted. But the group that I really want to get a hold of are my people. If you look at someone 55 to 64, we have a higher rate of suicide per 100,000 than those 15 to 24. I just have
I,
trouble. Go ahead.
yeah, so I read that statistic. It was like the kids attempt more but don't succeed. The adults succeed more. Is that what
Okay,
you're saying?
here's a yeah, and I'm going to give you a coaching moment. When we talk about suicide, and right now you've not heard me say the word commit because we don't say the word commit. They died by suicide. My brothers died by suicide. And the other term, Wendy, we don't use is success because there's no success in a suicide.
Well, that's
There is
true. There
none.
is no
It's just failure.
success.
Everyone loses. So it's a coaching opportunity there. Um, More attempts, yes. Women have more attempts, by the way. Men are 79% of all completed suicides. Women have 3 to 4 times more attempts. For some reason, guys, and I normally don't talk about means when I do my talk live, but guys use lethal means, and it's over. There's no coming back, and it's awful. They go in the woods, they don't come out. But if you look at 55 to 64, 16.9 per 100,000, the kids are at 14.2. The nation's at 14. And then if you look at 65 to 74, it gets a 14.5. And then 75 to 84, it's 18.4 per 100,000. And that's how we measure this, per 100,000. So in 100,000 people, on a national average, we can expect to lose 14 to suicide. In 65 to 74, we can expect to lose 14.5. So it's above that average. And that's not good. In the world of suicide, you want to be below average, and gosh darn it, we want to be at zero if we could. A man can
Right.
dream, right?
Yeah. So help me understand, they have that U curve of happiness where it shows that when people are in midlife and raising kids and all the responsibility, like that, their curve of happiness goes down. And then they say that this curve goes up as we get older. So help me understand why the rate of suicide is also going up, or why do you think it is?
When I went to school, I was an accounting major and not a psychologist, psychiatrist. Want to get that out to the audience. I was just a guy that was bopping through life and had these two events and delved into this world. Um, I think when you come to midlife, and I went through a divorce midlife, and that was brutal. And, that was the first time I ever thought about checking out. And you look at the work I do. And that idea popped in my mind. I'm like, I quickly chased it out of there. I thought about my two boys, like, oh, come on, that's the stupidest thing you could do right now. But I was shocked that it got in there. I think at some point, this is a theory of mine. We get lonely at the top, as we get older, we tend to get lonely. We lose friends. I'm speaking about guys, and there's a book behind me called Lonely at the Top. It's about men as they get older. They just tend to lose friends. They just less social opportunities. When you had those kids, gosh, football games, practices, travel, whatever you did, you were, I was Martin and Brennan's dad. That's what my identity, and that was fine. I was fine with that identity because it got me out of the house. I was doing stuff. It was funny when they left the house and I became an empty nester, everyone's like, "Aren't you excited?" Like, "No, I hated it."
I
I
know
loved
it's a
having those
hard.
guys around.
Yeah.
I loved that. I couldn't go to a high school football game. I looked like a creeper. Like, "Hey, which kid's yours?" "Oh, I don't have one. They're in college." Like, "Get out of here." Like, you gotta move on. And I think some guys, this is just a theory of mine that you look back and, we just did a whole study in our church about Ecclesiastes. It's Hevel. It's all meaningless. They look back and they go, "This is it. I did all this work and everything, and this is it." And I do believe when you get to a certain point, maybe you retire something, you're looking for a purpose. This is why what you do, Wendy, and we try to reinvent ourselves, we have to find that connection to something. And there are times in our lives we have to reconnect because the connection was broken. My connection to Blythewood High School with my boys was broken the day they graduated.
Hmm.
It's gone. Maybe I could stuck around and coach a little bit, but it was over. So I got to
Right.
reinvent myself. I got to reconnect somehow. And believe it or not, this whole thing I'm doing with suicide prevention has given me like a great connection to all groups. I talked about the college kids earlier. I'm trying to figure out how to get my boomers in a room because they're a tough crowd, especially men, to get them in a room and say, we need to talk about this. So if any tips you can give me, I'm all
Yes.
ears.
Yeah, so that's interesting because women are used to talking about our feelings and we get together with other women and that's the conversation and men get together and they I don't know, they talk about sports. What do you all talk about? So maybe you have to have something to entice them. Anyone in the audience, you have some ideas on how you can get men into the room?
I do have an idea, and I started it when I was in my apartment building. When I went through a divorce, I moved from a big house to a small apartment, and a bunch of us started going to breakfast. And we call it the Camo Hat Club because men tend to camouflage their emotions. So every first Thursday, and I want guys to do this. It's so simple. This is so simple, and we barely pull it off, but we pull it off. Every first Thursday of the month at 8 o'clock, we meet at one location, the same location, and we have breakfast. Some days there's 8 guys there. Some days there's 2 guys there. It just depends what life what hits you. And we were literally, it's hilarious. We'll literally text each other on that Wednesday. I'm not talking about a full blown, club with officers and Robert's rules. We just get together to eat. And Wednesday we'll go, "Hey, is that thing tomorrow?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's always, the first Thursday." And we just whoever shows up, shows up. But it's a touch point. And recently I had that little organization and there was about 5 or 6 of us around the table and a new guy showed up and he was in the boomer generation and he was going through a divorce. Little did he know that he was surrounded about 4 out of the 5 guys at that table had gone through a divorce. And we just looked at him and said, "Brother, do you have any questions?" Because
Mm.
we've all been there and it sucks. It just sucks. But we're here. We're still alive. We are resilient. What can we do to help you?
Yeah. So y'all do talk about life stuff, think feelings and fears and yeah.
I think it's because I'm in the group. One of the caveats of the group at the end of the day, at the end of the meeting, we just say, "How's everybody's mental health?" That's the only rule we really have is uh, uh, how is your mental health? And that's the only thing we ask. And uh, that's that's simple. We could just and we try to check in each other like when we kind of administered that guy. It was awesome to watch that we were helping this guy out. And that's the only thing we say. How's everyone's mental health? And I think it's because I'm in the group because they know what I do. But I like to. It's not that hard for other. This thing is not hard to replicate.
Hmm.
You pick a day, you pick your crew, and you just keep through it. We went through COVID. We went right through it. We started meeting outdoors, but we just kept it going. And
Yeah.
I don't want this to be, Wendy. It's funny because I don't want to be a bunch of old guys in McDonald's talking about our prostates. That I don't want it to be.
Right.
So if it can go intergenerational, that'd be great. It's harder when you're younger and you got kids. It's hard to get out, but we all need to do it. And I kind
Yeah,
of
and it's
stole the idea. I stole the idea from you ladies, the Red Hat Club.
Uh,
That's an awesome organization. You all get together, you've given your whole life of service, and you're like, you know what, let's just go out to lunch.
yeah.
And you all deserve it.
And it's all about the connection. It's about
That's
building the
it.
connection, having your sense of community. You use the word resilient, Dennis. Is there part of your program, the Half a Sorrow Foundation, where you help people look at resilience, build up their resilience when they're faced with these issues?
I think one aspect that we do when we improve our mission is to improve mental health for individuals and organizations by promoting real conversations. I think the real conversation starts helping build resilience. When I get up on stage and talk about the two worst days of my life, and all of a sudden the room becomes safe, they're like, well, if that guy can talk about it, I can talk about it. And what we're doing, in fact, I'm doing it tomorrow. We're going to talk about with the group some aspects of what we call post traumatic growth. I've been following this group from afar, and they do a lot of work with veterans. And they talk about post traumatic growth. Now, Wendy, we all are familiar with post traumatic stress disorder, like when you went through a trauma. A lot of mental health and um, is manifested from a trauma, negative mental health. There's a trauma involved. Um, but does the trauma have to affect me negatively, or can it make me stronger? And that's what they try to emphasize in the post-traumatic stress growth. Your spirituality can get deeper, your relationships get better, maybe there's new opportunities. And we all know someone like this. We all know someone like this. They tell you their story and you go, how are you still standing? And not only
Mhm,
are they just surviving, they seem to be thriving, and
mhm.
they've faced unbelievable trauma in their past. So I'm really trying to push that hard, the post-traumatic growth stuff.
Yeah, so tell me about the Half the Sorrow Foundation, how you got started, that found the name, what you do.
It's funny you say that because I crowdsourced the name. I put, someone, I was about to start a nonprofit because people wanted to help me, which was really kind of them. And they say, Dennis, we love the work you're doing. It's needed. How can I help? Can I write you a check? And at the time, it was just me and my website, dennisgillan.com. Dennis, you think much of yourself? It was me and that website. So I started thinking, if I became a 501c3 and I could add people and other speakers and do more programs, this thing could be my legacy. This thing can take off. So I put it out in their Facebook one time. I said, hey, what should I name this thing? And I got a piece of advice from a good friend of mine from college. His name is Dave Mulgard. He said, don't name it after your brothers. All right. I've come to learn that's the best practice because my brother's name, it has some value, but as time goes on, the value diminishes. So I was in my presentation, I was talking about this thing as a Swedish proverb that a shared joy is a double joy. A shared sorrow is half a sorrow. And it resonates with the audience. People will come back to me later on and tell me that it meant a lot to them. And it meant a lot to me when I first heard it. I remember I think I heard it when I was 50. I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing's been around forever. How did I not hear this? So that's where we got our name, the Half a Sorrow Foundation. And it's interesting when you start sharing your sorrows like you did with your audience. You shared a rough day, a traumatic event. You'll cut it in half, they say, based on this proverb. A shared joy is a double joy, a shared sorrow is half a sorrow. A half of a half of a half. I'll always have something, a remainder. It
Mhm,
never gets to zero. And you know what? That's okay because that means my brothers were significant to me. That
mhm.
means they meant something to me. And if it gets to zero, I have to check for a pulse. I may turn around, the Grim Reaper's behind me going, Dennis, it's time,
Mhm.
right? But right now, I still feel I'll never get to zero, and nor will anyone in your audience. It's just the grief, let the grief do its work. And I get to honor my brothers by doing this work. So it's a win-win for everyone, except when I have to go through the slides where I talk about my brothers. It's brutal.
It's still very hard, I'm sure. Yeah.
It is. And it's funny you say that because when I do my regular talk, I call my keynote talk, I talk about him in the beginning and I get him out of the way. In the TEDx talk I did on loneliness, I left them to the end, and you literally could see me dying on stage. I'm like, I know what's coming. The audience doesn't know what's coming
Right.
because I started that talk saying, I know two guys that died alone. And at the end, there's the big reveal. It was my two brothers. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. But I'm up there on stage. I'm like, oh man, here they come. Here they come. That's why I like my regular talk because I get them out of the way, and then we go on to warning signs, risk factors, protective factors, and we go into living.
Yeah, so we did mention that we wanted to talk about warning signs. So, what are some of the warning signs, and what do you do if you see some of those warning signs?
Sure, and most times we try to break it down into three buckets with warning signs: some talk, behavior, and mood. And talk is someone who will verbalize it. They'll say something like, "Ah, you'll be better off without me." Like timeout, not cool. Or people will joke about, "Oh, I'd rather be dead," but they don't do it in front of me because they know what I do. Or if they do and they don't know my story, I privately pull them aside and say, "You may not know my story, but you said something there. Are you okay?" So they talk about it, they text about it, they'll say something, "I'm a burden, you're better off without me." Behaviors are like, people start giving stuff away. They start withdrawing. Someone who's hurting mentally will withdraw and isolate. So if you have, say, my little club, my little camel hat club, if we notice that Jack stopped, a guy named Jack was there all the time and all of a sudden he's not there, somebody needs to go check on Jack because they will isolate. They'll pull away or they may give away their stuff. And then there's behaviors. Uh, I kind of laugh at behaviors because I did them. Increased use of alcohol or drugs. When my older brother Mark died, I went on a bender. When my younger brother died, I sobered up, and I'm 28 plus years sober now. Um, and that's probably a good way. And then you'll see the be moody, apathetic. You just know you'll know, Wendy. You'll know when something's off. If you're a really good friend, uh, you have to go with your gut. Your gut will say something is not right. And the second part of your question was, all right, well, what do we do about it? I think you run to the bear. There's an old thing like if a bear's coming at you, you're supposed to lay down and play dead. And someone
Right.
said, no, run to the bear. Run to your problem because he won't expect it. You know, so this is one of those situations where you run to the bear, you go right at it and say, hey, are you okay? I've noticed these things, and you're just stepping in. You're coming from like a place of love. It's not confrontational, nor should it be. You could say something like, you have a lot going on. Someone who's been through all you've been through may be thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? And the way you
Really,
the way you word that,
you would be that forthcoming. Okay.
hey, in my line of work in this business, you can't afford to take any chances. You have to be all the training I do, and I do a lot of trainings, by the way. Be it assist training, safe talk. These are QPR. These are well known in the business, but all those trainings get us comfortable, Wendy, saying the S word. And the S word is suicide. Are you suicidal?
Mm. Hmm.
And if the person is, here's the deal. The audience that might be thinking in yourself, like, wow, that's a tough thing to say. If the person is suicidal, it would be often it's met with relief. Like they go, wow, you picked up that vibe. Thank you, for picking up that vibe. I've never had to see confrontation. I've done that. I've asked people, are you suicidal? And it was interesting. One guy, said, yeah. And then the next thing is like, what is your plan?
Oh,
And yeah, so you have to disarm the plan. So one, you have to see if they are suicidal. And then two, you have to figure out, well, have you thought about it? And you have thought about it. What were you thinking? And in this case, it was a firearm. And I'm on the phone with the guy and I said, do you think it would be okay if somebody came over and got that firearm and held it for you for a while? And I was expecting this huge battle, like, Second Amendment, it's my rights, I was expecting that. And the dude said to me on the phone, he goes, that's probably a good idea.
wow.
Wow. I was like, wow, okay, this stuff works. I had to put it in play.
Okay.
Not only do I
Huh.
teach it, I had to do it, and it was really working. I was like, all right, here we go.
Huh. All right. So you see some of these behaviors or you hear some of these terms, and it's not just, are you okay? Do you want to talk? It's, are you okay? Are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you thinking about suicide?
You
And
have to be
then
that direct.
what's your plan? Have you thought about
Yeah.
a
So
plan?
have you thought about
Just,
a plan? And then what in your head you're thinking about disarming the plan? Say they said, yeah, I got all these pills stockpiled. You just say something like, well, why don't I hold them for a while till we get through this? It's tough
wow.
work. It's not easy, folks. It's not easy, especially saying the S word. It's not an easy, it's a tall order, but with practice. And if you want me to train you, I'll train you. If you want to get a hold of me, we'll do it. We'll role play. And it's 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 a life-saving question. You can save a life.
Okay, so let's talk about the children. We want to get it so that the children feel like they have a safe person to talk to, they have a safe way of expressing their feelings. And you've addressed that partly in your children's book too. Can you tell me about that?
Wow, I just happen to have a copy right here. Wow, nice shoes. That's an interesting book. We wanted to go lower. I want to hit all ages. And I spoke at a middle school, high school, and I never went lower than that. And I know for a fact from my work here locally on the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but the youngest caller when I left that work was 7 years old. 7.
Oh,
They dialed the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is now 988, by the way. It's a shorter version of the old number. It's 988. So we know that. So I wanted to figure out a way to go lower. And I spoke at the University of Delaware. And sometimes I bring students up on stage with me. Now we vet them and we do safe messaging and they tell their story and they come up. And it's unbelievable. And at University of Delaware, my co-author, Stephen Peel, came up. There's Stephen's name right there. He came up and told the story about when he was in like junior high and he was having a rough day and he was thinking about suicide. He was literally thinking about it. And on the way out of school, one of the cool kids looked down and saw that he had new sneakers on and said, "Steven, I like your shoes." Now, Steven was waiting for like a punchline, like he's been picked on all day. And he's waiting for like, the other shoe to drop literally. And the guy goes, "No, really, I like your shoes." And that's how Steven left the building. So we decided I couldn't get that story out of my head. And I was in Delaware in 2018. So during the pandemic, I called Steven up. I said, "I cannot get that story out of my head. Can we do something with it?" So we decided to do a children's book. Now, in the book, we do not mention suicide. We just say the lead character's name is Derek. And we say Derek was sad and he thought every day would be like this. So that's what Steven thought every day was going to be like this. This is how it's going to be. This sucks. And that's as far as we go in the book. So the educator or the parent could take it from there. We tee it up, so to say. And then we put that out and we launched it in July and it's been a wild ride. I got to uh, do a book signing at a local Barnes and Noble. We flew Steven in. It was kind of neat. And the kids came up and it was really cute. And then a lot of grandparents came up. Some of our boomers came up and they wanted to buy it for their grandkids, but they also had a story to share where a
mm-hmm.
suicide touched their lives. So not only did we sign books that day, Wendy, we hugged a lot of people that day. We
Uh,
came around the table and they told me their story. And it's back to the vulnerability piece. They knew what I did, they knew what happened to me, and they knew Steven's story. So we hugged a lot of people that day, which was kind of cool.
yeah,
The
that's
book sales are
beautiful.
great. The hugs were awesome.
Right. Yeah, the hugs are even better, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Dennis, you were talking about the suicide prevention hotline. I would suspect, and out of my ignorance, I would suspect that somebody would only call the hotline if they really don't want to go through with it. They want help. I mean, I can't imagine I would call the hotline if I was gun in hand, ready to go. Is that true?
Well, that scenario has happened, but here's what most people who are suicidal, whether they call or not, there's a part of them that wants to die, but there's also a huge part of them that wants to live. And we call that ambivalence, right? I want to go, but I want to stay. I want to go, I want to stay. So a lot of people are on the fence, period. And we're so grateful when they call because then we speak to the part where they want to live. And there are people on this planet, Wendy, I remember one call, it's like, who's going to take care of my dog? And there are people on this planet because of their pets. And then you go, "Hey, what's your dog's name?" You just get
Right.
them talking about it. "Oh, Mr. Freckles. What kind of breed is he?" You speak to the life part. And I remember, taking those calls and people just want someone to talk to. And I was on a call for about an hour and a half and we went full circle. But eventually the people on the call are smart. they know the solution. They just need to hear themselves process it out loud. And at the end of the call, you hang up and everything's, I'd say it's all Skittles and unicorns, but they have a way forward or at least hope for tomorrow. And that's what I've become in a sense now with this whole ministry. It's I'm not a dope dealer. I'm a hope dealer. I'm trying to
Hope
say,
dealer.
hope dealer. Yeah, trying to get people, and there may be an opportunity, by the way, with our boomers, for opportunities to volunteer. These helplines. I was a volunteer. They're always looking for people. Now there are some paid professional positions. Like I remember when we had someone who covers from 12 to 6, 12, midnight to 6 in the morning, we had to pay that person because that's a tough shift, you know. But during the day and stuff, for the boomers who want to help, if this touches a nerve with anybody, every call center could use more bodies. That's a
I was
fact.
going to ask you about that. How would somebody go about getting started? I mean, they don't have the mental health counseling degree or anything. How would they get started?
Well, it was interesting. When I got started, I'll just use my story. I found out where the center was and I found out the director's name and I called her and I said, "My name is Dennis Gillan. I was an accounting major, but this is what happened to me, and I want to help." And she said, "Dennis, get your butt in here." It's just like, come on in. Now, for anyone who's worried about that, I don't think I can do this. You really listen a lot on the helpline, and you can learn how to listen, but they also train you. They will never put you out there. I went through 12 weeks of training, you know,
Wow.
at night with, doing this. I had a day job, but I also had to go at night to these Wednesday programs. And Saturday, one day was all day. So they really do train you for these scenarios. And it was some of the most, heartwarming work I've ever done. So if anyone's thinking about it, you're nervous about it, don't worry. They, they will guide you. And it's, I would say it's not that hard because they were never like those really, really um, intense calls. Now they do exist, but most calls where people just needed to talk to someone and they came to the conclusion themselves that, life is worth living. And I appreciate you being there. On the helpline, my name was Marty, which is my middle name. And a lot of calls ended with like, "Marty, thank you for listening." And boom, off they went. So there's a real great volunteer opportunity for someone looking to find their purpose, like we talked about earlier, and
Hmm.
reconnect. This is a great way to reconnect with people and volunteer.
I think it absolutely is a great way. I just have to ask though, how do you protect your own mental health, not take all of that home with you after a shift on a hotline like that?
Well, I smoke a lot of crack. No, that's a joke. That stop
Stop.
it, stop it, stop it. Because I often share
Stop.
the stage with someone. Stuff. Yeah, that. No, your self care is not selfish. You truly, truly have to take care of yourself. And I alluded to earlier. I'm sober 28 years. That helps. But also, there's times where you just got to disconnect because you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? You got to go fill your cup. And some of the things I do, and everyone's different. Whatever floats your boat, floats your boat, as long as it's legal. And I go hiking. I try to get back into nature. My wife does gardening. No matter what you do to rejuvenate, you got to do that. So there will be times like at least the helpline. I had enough time in between shifts to recharge and come back. And I remember one night on the helpline, the girl before me had a rough call, and I just said, "Hey, stay here while I answer the phones. Let's don't go anywhere yet." And we charged each other up, in between
Mm,
calls, like, "Hey, tell me about that shift. What happened?" And
yeah.
and they had counseling available to us as well. So
Okay.
yeah, it was very helpful. But you got to do what you got to do for self care, and self care, as I said, is not selfish. You got to take care of number one.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us how we can help Half a Sorrow Foundation.
Sure. What you can do, obviously there's a financial, now we're a 501(c)(3). If you can make a financial commitment, great. The other thing is let people know I'm out there. If you can do, if you could bring me in to speak at any function, you're part of any group. I do a lot of church groups, civic groups, Rotary clubs. If you're part of any group that needs to hear it, I've spoken at a CrossFit gym. You know, you get a group of people together and you want to talk about mental health. I'm your guy. So financially, yes, gigs, get me speaking engagements, just let other people know I'm out there. We do a thing at churches called Soul Shop. It's to help train church leaders. Let your pastor know that we're out here. Just let people know that we exist. Visit our website, check out my TEDx talk. That'll give you a flavor for how I present. It's not all doom and gloom. We will laugh. I had one woman came up to me one time after I spoke. She goes, "You owe me money for mascara." I I was crying, and then I was laughing, and then I was crying again, and that's the journey, that's life.
Yeah.
So, just let people know we're out there, and if you can help out, there's a donate button, of course, on the website. That always helps, but yeah, it is greatly appreciated, by the way, and we will use it to go places like homeless shelters and places that we can't charge, we just can't.
Yeah. So you can find the foundation at halfasorrow.org, or you can email Dennis directly at dennis@halfasorrow.org. So that this audience should be an audience that's connected with churches and organizations that might be useful to connect you with the boomer crowd to help you reach out. So hopefully we'll hear from some of them. Thank you so much, Dennis. This was definitely enlightening to me and hopefully to other people on the call.
I want to thank you for taking on this topic because sometimes you say we're going to bring out a suicide prevention guy on, and people, oh, we're not going to listen to that one. And I had a guy come to the Rotary Club one time, a meeting. He was an older fella, and he said, "I saw the agenda this morning, and I didn't want to come." And at the end of the talk, he goes, "I'm glad I came." So
Mhm.
thank you. I'm glad you were kind enough to bring me on.
Well, and I'm glad you reached out because you're right. This is a topic that is an uncomfortable topic to talk about, but I think you phrased it in a way that made it approachable, and people could hear how they might be able to work on the hotline and at least notice if something is changing in somebody that they care about. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, to hear more about what we are doing on Hey Boomer, you can subscribe to our email list. You can go to our website or go to bit.ly/heyboomer-subscribe. And then you'll get 2 emails. One that is about what's happening in a weekly blog, and you'll get the Monday links for the show. And if you have other questions that you'd like to talk to me privately about, you can email me at wendy@heyboomer.biz. And please support our sponsor, roadscholar.org/heyboomer. Sign up for a trip, go look at their travel adventures. Sometimes you don't even have to leave home. They have online travel adventures too. So yeah, they started them during the pandemic. So that's pretty cool. Next week, my guest's name is Anna Hall. Anna was a teenager when she started volunteering in a nursing home in her hometown of Hanover, New Hampshire. Throughout her career of working with senior living communities, she recognized that purpose, as we talked about today, builds resilience and improves wellness. In 2018, Anna began building what she calls the purpose equation, an evidence-based framework that guides individuals to discover their unique purpose. So tune in next week to learn more about discovering your purpose. And I like to leave you all with the belief that we can live with passion, live with relevance, and live with courage. And remember that we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been